To get settled, this meeting is being live streamed, and I believe as we click on the little live stream link, we will go over some logistics. It's a little different today. Right now, you're only seeing me, but you'll be able to see myself and Dr. New and our special guest. And so rather than me introducing Mother Reeves, is what I've called her, her son will be introducing her, but Dr. New will give a little bit of background information. We are excited. Mother Reeves, there you are on the camera. Let's see. All right, so we're going to wave to everybody because how many people are on the screen today? I'm sorry, Mr. Gowan, how many? He said a lot. We have 25 participants on the screen and we have about 15 or so in the audience, and we thank everybody for joining us this evening. All right, so this evening, I'm going to remind us of what we're doing that's special this evening, and I think as we get the cameras moving, we will be moving along with highlighting folks that are on the screen. If you want to participate in this particular session as you normally would, you just raise your hand and Dr. McDonald will call on you if you have a question, and he will allow you to ask that yourselves directly. If you'd rather put your question in the chat, please do so. And when we call on Dr. McDonald, he can either read one of those questions or call on someone that's on the Zoom. For our audience that's participating this evening, if you have a question that you would like to ask throughout this evening of Mother Reeves, then you can come to the middle podium and present your question, and she will be able to respond to the questions with the time that we have. Now for this evening, we are in the last 2 days of Women's History Month, the last 2 days. And every year for the last 3 years, we've had someone who is either 100 or very close to 100. And in this person's case, they'll be 101 this year. We have had someone to talk about life, history, their life experience over the last 100 years. So you are in for one delightful treat. So with that, without any further introductions, Dr. New, any other comment that you'd like to make about this special time that we're going to have this evening, Dr. New?
I am just very excited to meet Mrs. Julie Reeves today. She is a delightful woman and her memory is so sharp. And she has been telling me the most fascinating stories. I think maybe because we share the same birthday, but I have just loved listening to her. And she was just sharing about her first real job, I guess. For 10 years, she was
you want to hold it?
Okay,
So that we
okay.
can, that's going to be a
Maybe
question
she'll
that
tell
we
that
might
too.
ask.
All right, but I didn't know that because that doesn't have a lot to do with the Brown case, but it could have a lot to do with her perspective on the things that were happening in Topeka at that time. So if you know people who should be in this group who haven't signed in yet, you'll want to text them and tell them they don't want to miss this because she is just a phenomenal woman.
Right, so with that, to give some of the background, I'm so glad Dr. New said that because you can ask questions about life, questions about what she thinks about Topeka or education. You can ask about historical events. This is an opportunity for us to learn and to listen to learn, not to listen to respond, but to listen to learn and to grow from what we hear this evening. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mother Reeves' son, Dr. Doug Reeves. He's going to come to the podium and give an introduction. He did send us a bio, but honestly, after meeting her over lunch, there is no bio that could be one sentence that would be sufficient. So he'll be giving her an introduction and sharing a little bit about what you're about to hear, and then we're going to open it up to the Equity Council and start with a beginning statement from Mother Reeves.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anderson. I just want to say to the members of this council, I went to your website and there is something remarkable about you that I don't see around the United States because you said that equity is for everybody. Equity is for all. And the stereotype used by our critics in public education is that equity is just code word for low expectations of low performing kids. Not in 501. What you said is that equity applies to everybody. And I just want to express my respect and appreciation for that. Now to Julie Reeves. What a remarkable life. And she's still going strong, as you will see in just a few moments. As we think about all the things that she has accomplished, she is a born leader and a born teacher. She has taught Sunday school for 70 years, never got paid for it, but nevertheless did extraordinary things. Her leadership extends from local community organizations to an international arts association that she led. And I just find her imprimatur everywhere I go. One of the founders of the Kansas State Historical Society Visitors and Guides, one of the leading authorities for the Topeka Civic Symphony. Everywhere you look, education, arts, beautification of our community, Julie has had a hand in that. And I'll just say one final thing. In addition to all those challenges, she raised 3 boys, 2 of which turned out well. My older brother is a retired Major General in the United States Army and a true hero for our country. My younger brother, Andrew, was a Topeka High graduate and won the state debate championship, which neither of his older brothers were ever able to do. And I'm a writer and a teacher, so I just really want to express my respect for the fact that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And Mom, you did a pretty good job. So I'll turn it over to you.
All right, so Mother Reeves, are you ready for your first question? I'm going to ask you the very first question, and you can just speak freely.
Okay.
Can you share a little bit about how long you've been in Topeka and a little bit about yourself? How old are you, Mother Reeves?
Say again.
How old are you?
I'm 100. And I'm almost in county. I'm almost 100 and a half.
So 100 and a half years old. Can you speak to your life experience in Topeka and perhaps just giving people that are on the screen and in the audience just a snapshot of things you've been involved in this county? And then we're going to open it up to others to ask questions.
You know, it would be hard for me to remember or to speak about the number of things that were done when we first arrived in Topeka. The number of just plain kind, welcoming things that happened to us. We arrived on a train and we came from Kansas City, and I knew we were following the river, and it went north and south. No, it went east and west. And so when we arrived, we got on a cab and went up to the Kansas Hotel, and the street was the same direction as the railroad track. And so I assumed that Kansas Avenue was east and west. And it took me almost 2 years to get over that, because actually we had gone around a curve as we came into Topeka, and I hadn't noticed. And the train was no longer going east and west, it was going north and south. So it took me 2 years to get used to Topeka, but it didn't take me 2 minutes to get used to Kansas, because we had help the minute we got off of the train. We had our suitcases, went up to the Kansas Hotel, and had 2 nights to be there. That was the limit, because they were so full of people coming and going. And so we got up to the second day and we still hadn't found a place to live. And we were looking in the newspaper, and there was a place that we could be in the basement, but we went and decided it just wasn't. We just, well, I'd be honest, we sat down on the bed and it went screech. We can't stay here. So we took the next place and drove up to the house, and my husband went up to the door, and they had advertised for a girl to stay in a room with an adjoining bath. And he said, could we be here for the night or for a few nights? And the person at the house said, well, yes, that would be all right. And she had met him for the first time. It was getting dark. It was October. And she said, I have to go to a meeting, but here are the keys for the house. So you can get in. And he said, we have to get rid of these groceries that we bought that we thought we were going to be in the basement. And this, where we were going, didn't have a kitchen. And so she said, well, here are the keys to the house. And so you can get back in and spend the night. didn't ask him one question about himself, didn't see me. She just took us on faith. I mean, we needed a place to sleep for the night, and there was the door was open. I never got over it. And as it turned out, we stayed there for 3 months waiting for the apartment building to be finished being built. And we babysat with their children and their 2 daughters, and we became good friends for the rest of their lives.
What
That's
year was,
Topeka.
that is Topeka. What year was that?
That was 1948.
Oh, in
And
1948.
so that was our introduction to Topeka. And as we learned why there were friends in all parts of the town. I grew up in Omaha, and in Omaha was segregated. And when I got to Topeka, I suppose it was, but you know what? We didn't have a car. So I took a bus everywhere I went. And there were people of color on the buses everywhere in Topeka. I thought, this is wonderful. They must be all over the place. Well, maybe not quite true in 1948, but they were going all over the place and with no compunction and with a sense of freedom that I had not seen in Omaha. It was different. And it was a very healthy situation that we came into, and we were looking forward to having children here, which we didn't have right away. So I wound up on the radio, but you know, I just knew it was the right place to bring up children. My husband loved his job. He worked for the Santa Fe and learned a lot about Kansas and things he didn't know about and things I didn't know about. But I became a devotee of all things Kansas, and he loved telling stories about the people in Kansas that were interesting and the history of Kansas. So we certainly became at home in Topeka right away. It was home.
Well, you are like a walking history book with the knowledge that you have and the storytelling ability. We have a lot of questions bubbling up, so we're going to turn it over to staff to come to the microphone and to begin to ask their questions. We'll ask you to speak loudly into the microphone. We're going to start off with Mr. McKay. He is a social studies teacher, as you talked about your husband loving history. So how perfect. And he is at Robinson Middle School. Mr. McKay.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
I also want to add that I am from Waterloo, Iowa, and I've been up to Council Bluffs many a time. So I want to just state that. So my question for you is, growing up in the 1930s during the Great Depression, so it's twofold. What was life like for you during the Great Depression? And then, of course, going on to World War II. One of the things that I try to bring home with my students is that living history.
Say the last part again. What after World War II?
So again, what was life like for you during the Great Depression? And then what was life like for you during World War II?
You know, in comparison today, the greatest difference I see was that my father had a job. He was not in danger of losing his job, but we knew that there were people who were in need during the 30s, not close. I went to school and everybody seemed to be happy going to school. But I guess the easiest way I can tell it was one Thanksgiving, and my mother had a huge basket that she was filling with goodies. Obviously, it was going to be for a fancy Thanksgiving dinner for somebody else. And as she spoke about it, it was obvious that there were contributions from more than just her, from other people. And I don't know whether I was 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there probably. And I said, "Who's that for?" And in a tone that I never heard her use to me before, and I don't think ever after. And she said, "None of your business." I was just shocked to be taught that way. And in that instant, I knew 2 things. One, that somebody needed this a lot more than we did. And it might be somebody I knew. that I would be going to school with. And that was a shock, that there was somebody that was that needy, that they weren't going to have a big Thanksgiving dinner without help from others. And that really brought home what it was like to be there. As far as the difference between today and then, you know, we weren't wasteful. You wore hand-me-down clothes. You wore everything that you owned until there was nothing left to it but a dust rag. My favorite story is my parents going to a movie one night, and we all were out washing the car because it was a beautiful, big, new black car. Not very big, I think it was a Ford. And so my father traveled, so he wore cars out quite fast. Anyway, they went off to the movie, went in the door, and came out a different door in the back and came up to their car sitting on the side of the street. And there on the back bumper was a pair of pink panties hanging on the bumper. They had been used to polish the car, and that was the last use you could make of them. But everything was used. You didn't have to buy. If you needed a nail, you could go to the hardware store and buy one nail or one screw, and you paid 5 cents for it or whatever. And they wrote out a ticket for 5 cents. It was the way things were done. But we didn't feel a sense of need, but we never were able to waste things. If you passed the dish around the table with the potatoes in it, you took just the amount of potatoes you could eat. You could always have seconds, but you didn't leave with potatoes left on your plate. That was a no-no. And it was that about everything we did. And we didn't suffer. We probably worked harder than we ever did, because at one point they bought 5 acres outside of town, and they thought they were lucky. They had 2.5 acres of grapes. And that was a lot of work. And we each had 14 rows of grapes to weed and to tie up and so forth. And we loved every minute of it. We never worked harder in our life. It was a way of life that was not a bad way of life. And as I say, it was hard for some people. My brother came home from high school one day in tears because they were building a new stadium or bleachers for the high school football field. And he heard the workman say, "You better slow down. We've got to make this job last," to another worker. And that was his awareness of how tough things were, because obviously that person wasn't saying it. He was saying it hurtfully because he was proud of his work and would not ordinarily have been slowing down, but that they needed the money. So you became aware of things sort of sideways, you know.
He asked a question about the war. Do you remember anything about the war during the time in which you were in your early years?
The war,
Yes.
World War II.
Yes.
Oh, I graduated from high school in 1940 and started my first year of school over in Illinois at a Swedish Lutheran school, Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois. And the man that was to be my husband, I met him in my first year. And before my second year, he was a junior at that time. Before my second year, that was Pearl Harbor didn't occur until December of my second year. In September of that year, he was living in Chicago and he was drafted. He was in the service before. And so I barely had a chance to meet him before he was gone. And he was gone the rest of the time. And he had 7 credits left to graduate. And they said in the word was in Chicago, 2 arms, 2 legs, you're in. That was the draft. That's just the way things were. So I lived through 3 years of wartime, and all of the men on the campus bit by bit evaporating until by the time I graduated, There were, as we said, 4 Fs in ministerial students,
Hmm.
and that was it. But so I got busy on my senior year and found a job my senior year and worked from 8 in the morning until noon at the local radio station, and went to school the rest of the time.
Hmm.
But they're just, all of the men were gone. Some of the girls were getting married to the guys before they went overseas, but more often than not, they went without their, and lots, in those days, lots of girls married the fellows that they met at school. These days, I don't know whether that's so frequent or not, but it was a different time. But it opened for the first time in history, the school newspaper was going to be edited by a woman. For the first time, that was going to have the business manager be a woman. I was offered that job, but I already had this other one, so I didn't do that. But it was a different, it was an era of opportunities. My sister had a job in Chicago at Marshall Fields, and I think she had been there 8 months when her boss was drafted, and she suddenly was in charge of 82 departments at Marshall Fields when she was just fresh out of school. So,
Wow.
opportunities, there were many, and lots of people took advantage of them.
What a different perspective on the war creating opportunity for women to step in the shoes that men once had at that time. That's a powerful, different perspective that you don't always hear. We have some questions popping up on the screen. Thank you, Mr. McKay. Ms. Foster, did you have a question for our guests? And Dr. McDonald's going to take you off mute, and there you go.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, good afternoon. It is such a pleasure to be able to have this opportunity to ask this question. I am retiring soon, and my question for you is, to what do you attribute your mental acuity? How in the world do you remember all of these events so clearly?
Well, you know what I think I would say more than anything else was I am incredibly curious. I never have ceased having this awful curiosity about everything in life, the bug under the leaf in the lawn in the house, in the yard. I'm curious about people. I ask questions of people. I get to know them, and I'm always curious about children. Children have always been my favorite people to be with, and but everything about the universe, I'm constantly. I just am. I'm never filled with knowledge. And I say to this day, if I learn one new thing, it's a good day. So I never get bored. I can't remember ever being bored. And so you just, as I say, I love learning more. I do lots of reading and have all my life. Today and for the last few years, it's been on Audible. And I listen to books, and sometimes a book is better read than verbally, so that you hear it than when you're reading it on site. It's a wonderful way to continue to read if you lose your vision. But I don't want to say I've turned adversity into advantage, but that's kind of what's happened. If I couldn't walk, I learned to walk with a walker, and whatever happened, I always found some way to figure out how to get more out of it. But I do have an awful curious part of me. I want to know everything about everything. And so as a child, I remember reading books about places that I hadn't been, a book about somebody who'd been in Tibet or someplace that I figured I'd never get to, but I I was always curious.
You think about those connections in the brain when we're teaching young people to ask questions and that inquiry-based approach. That's a powerful piece. In fact, it's part of our mission to engage, prepare, and inspire students for a lifetime of learning, which is what you just spoke to. I believe Dr. New has a question about the Brown case. I think one of the items, we want to know what you remember about the Brown case, but Dr. New, do you want to ask that question about the Brown v. Board case? And I believe your husband might even have some of the oral arguments possibly, but Dr. New, would you like to phrase a question for Mother Reeves?
Tell me again the subject.
The Brown v. Board case, do you remember back when Linda Brown and
Oh,
all of
my
the
goodness.
plaintiffs,
Oh, my goodness.
what do you remember about that you
Well-
could share with the audience?
Well, my husband wound up as an attorney. And so from a legal aspect, I can remember when we were in Lincoln and he was in law school, him talking about Plessy v. Ferguson way back then, long before the Brown case ever was part of our life. And we came to Topeka in 1948, and it wasn't too long before, by the time I was in radio, I was hearing about it. I can't tell you, I didn't have guests on my program. It was strictly ad lib and for me, so I didn't have an opportunity to interview people, but I knew because of the other things that I did, the first organization I joined was AAUW, which was a group of women who were seeking to make opportunities more for women who were at the university level. In many schools, most schools, far and away most schools, a woman could never become a full professor, let alone head of the department. That just wasn't happening. And this is what we advocated for. So I started as an advocate. And as I got involved in other things, like we helped to start Meals on Wheels. And for that, I appeared before community giving and before the state, one of the committees working at the State House I can't remember whether it was the Senate or the House, and various places as an advocate. And that just sort of became part of my life. Whatever it was that I was championing, that was part of it. I don't know that I was ever doing it back in the 30s when I was growing up, but my mother was that kind of person. She put me in a ballet class at the YWCA. And I know it was because there were people of color and was a little girl from India in the class and so forth. And of course, with my curiosity, there was no problem about my finding out about these people and becoming friends with them. They were never going to make a ballerina out of me, but at least it was an opportunity that my mother saw. And she worked with, she was very active in Church Women United, which was an opportunity for her to become friends with people of color. And she had fast friends, good friends in their homes, and they were in our home, and in a way that we were maybe exposed more than most children, but certainly grew up with open minds. And the same happened in our home. I got interested in Church Women United and became very active in some of the activities that they had, which were a bridge. It was narrow, it was Christian and so forth, but it was a way for women to meet other women and be on a friendly level that they wouldn't otherwise have had the opportunity.
So exposure, you were exposed to others, you asked questions, and you learned from that experience. As we think about today, and we're going to open this back up both to the screen and to the audience. Any questions from the audience for the microphone. Ms. Bowley, did you just have your hand up? We'll turn it over. This is our board president, Ms. Bowley. She's also a retired teacher, and she is the president of the school board.
It is so nice to meet you. I was listening to your story about World War II and women taking over positions during World War II. I was wondering how women felt when the men came back from war. Did women feel like they lost ground in moving forward in their progress?
Say that again.
When the men came home from war, did women were pushed out of jobs? Did women feel like they had lost ground in advancing women's positions after the war?
Women being women didn't take that defensive attitude. They just went out and did better. I don't remember women as being defensive about the fact that they weren't given the opportunities that men were. The time came, and let's be honest, the 60s had a lot to do with it. But as I grew up, I had my algebra teacher was the only woman math teacher in all of Omaha. My high school principal was the only woman principal of all the high schools in Omaha. And it was Miss Mary McNamara. And let me tell you, she was somebody to be reckoned with. She could walk onto the stage at that high school, and it was built for 800 people, and there were 1,600 in the school when I went to school. I had one class in what used to be the coal bin, and it was whitewashed. But anyway, and you may do, but she would walk on the stage and she would put one hand up like this, and there was silence immediately. And then she spoke in a very modulated voice and told us whatever we were supposed to hear. And it was, the women who struggled to be recognized, at least to some degree, were recognized. And we were conscious of that. I was conscious when I went to school and had the only woman math teacher. I was very proud to be taking algebra from her and geometry. It was, it was something we were aware of even then, that women were discriminated against. So
I had one more question that this is getting harder because I like to ask it of people who are older than me. And that is narrowing quickly. So my question is, of all the inventions that you've seen in your lifetime, what is the one that you think improved your life the most?
improved my life. What?
And this is an invention that improved her
yes,
life
and
the
it-
most, an invention.
Dishwasher? Well, things like that definitely improved my life.
Yeah.
And I took art classes for years, and along about that time, the microwave was introduced into our society. And the word was that if you had a microwave, you could spend one more hour painting, because you could come home and stick something in the microwave and not spend so much time getting dinner for the family. So it did impact us. But, as to what, one of the things that didn't make my life better particularly, it made it more interesting. But the year after Doug was born was the year of Brown v. Board. So that's how far back it goes. He doesn't really remember it, but my husband was an attorney and he was following it all the way. He had subscribed to a monthly magazine that gave him the reports of whatever decisions the Supreme Court of the United States had made, and word for word, everything that was in the arguments and in the decision, and whether it may have been only one decision, but usually there was a dissent, and so he got to read all of that. So he was in on it. Now, the year of the Brian V. Board was the year we got our first television set. So all of a sudden, instead of hearing over the radio about what was going on and reading in the newspaper, and we always not only had one, but we had two. When we first came to Topeka, they told us, oh, you have to take the Kansas City Star as well. If you want to hear all the news about what's going on at the State House, you have to have two papers. So we always took two papers and obviously read them. Sunday afternoon was read the papers from cover to cover. But back to the point of having that information coming to us, all of a sudden we were seeing the riots, the Dr. King speaking, and the things that were going on that you can't imagine the difference if you never saw any of that. And all of a sudden you saw those people at the Selma Bridge. It was totally different. And Marian Anderson standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial and singing. And I was such a music fan, and I admired her voice. I can remember listening to it over the radio and so forth on rare occasions. And if you've listened to it, there's nothing like it. Nobody else has ever had a voice like that. And
true.
so, all of a sudden we were seeing these things, and that had huge impact. I don't think there's any question but what things came to us in a totally different way, and especially things connected with integration and the things of the first child going to the school in Little Rock and so forth. To see that and see that child walking, not have a picture on the front page of the paper or anything like that, but the movement, it had an impact that you can't imagine when you never had it before. The one place you saw it was to go to a movie, and they always had like movie tone news or something, and they had about maybe 10, at most 15 minutes of news that were the accumulation of the week. And so you had some idea of what was going on and seeing that it in action. But the idea of flipping on the evening news and you're watching from all over the world, totally different.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to have you here
Thank you.
and taking us back, for me, kind of remembering some of those times. So thank you.
I believe we have a few more questions on the screen as we go between these. Dr. McDonald, do you have someone with a hand up on the screen, sir, or a question in the chat?
Yes, we have a question from Ashley Rivas, a kindergarten teacher at Scott and a member of our K-State leadership program. She wants to know if you have any advice for children living today on how to become successful lifelong learners.
Boy, do I wish that I could answer that question well. I had a fall 3 years ago and I was in rehab for 5 weeks. And one of the people who took care of me was a little high schooler who was just adorable. She was a good nurse. She was a good person to begin with. It always starts with that. And she was a straight A student at Highland Park. She was a member of the math club. She was interested in that. And I was so excited about her future. And I kept saying, are you thinking of where you want to go to college? Are you doing something about it? And so forth. No, I want to get an apartment with my boyfriend. Oh, no. And I talked to her night after night. I would talk. I will help you. I know people who can help you. I can see to it that you can get your education. And how you break through that, boy, I wish I had the answer. But as far as children are concerned, well, my method in Sunday school was make it a story, tell it like a story. Even if you tell them that you're making it up and it isn't necessarily true what you're saying, but you make it so that it's interesting for whatever they want to hear, and you can make it from your viewpoint, but you can tell them what is good and what can happen. Don't say all the bad things that are going to happen to you if you don't go down this primrose path, but all of the good things that will happen to you. I think if I had one thing that I would tell you to be sure to teach children is about voting, how important their vote is, how it has changed the way of the world, what we have done in this country because we have the vote and because everybody has the vote, and what they need to know to be a good voter, and how exciting it is to go to the poll and think that your vote, your stroke of the pen can change somebody else's life. Make it exciting and make all learning exciting. Make it fun. And you have used so many things to make it, to capture children's imaginations. But I saw this noon in the way that you can catch a child who is seemingly uninterested, and then, boy, they can't resist something that's mechanical and moving around and something that they will have fun with. And these days, we've already discovered what the internet does for children to learn by using that, and to help direct their learning has become a teacher's job, is to be sure they're learning from the right sources and learning in the right direction. But whatever you can do to capture their imaginations, I think is maybe the best that you can do. I have so much admiration for when I walk into a classroom, and I don't so often anymore, but I certainly used to, and I see every single face focused on the teacher and what she's telling them. Boy, I know that teacher is a jewel without price.
Thank you for that answer. Do we have a question in the audience that someone would like to ask before we go back to the video? Dr. Nguyen, I have a couple of questions that we'd like to ask you, but first, anyone on the video that still has a question, Dr. McDonald?
Yes, we have a question from Dr. Mejia.
I'll turn it over to Dr. Mejia.
Good evening. It is such an incredible pleasure to meet you and hear you share your story, and what I posted on the question is your undoubtedly amazing life. Thank you for sharing that. My question is, what would you say is your biggest legacy, and how would you like to be remembered?
Oh, wow. I don't know what my legacy is. It certainly isn't just living this long. You just keep putting one foot in front of the other and keep going. But as far as what I would like to be remembered for, I'm sure having endless curiosity, and for it was so easy to love things that were worthwhile. I loved gardening, and I would take my grandchildren out to the backyard and say, find the tiniest flower that you can find. And of course, it had to be a weed in the grass, but for them, it was an adventure. They had something to look for. Make learning an adventure for everyone, and it isn't going to take that way with everybody. I taught Sunday school long enough to know that there are children who really are resistant, and you can't figure out why, because their brothers and sisters are excited about learning and so forth. But you just keep trying and keep doing your best to capture what they like to do. We sent them to summer camp out in the outside of Junction City, and they'd live out of doors and so forth and come back enthusiastic about going back. So what the magic was, for me, being out of doors and learning about nature is magic, but there's magic in everything they do. And if you can, I've found with children frequently, when you, instead of looking for the biggest things, think of something tiny that they have to go and search for. And it's entertaining. I guess I would say I tried to make education entertaining, but I don't know whether you're born with the curiosity that I have, but there's always something, I don't know, when I think about how long I have yet to live, I think, oh, there's so much I don't know. I want to know more about this and that and the other thing. And so it's easy to look forward to the next day. Not a problem.
All right. Any other questions in the audience? And she put a heart on the screen for you. I see Mother Reeves. There's a little red heart up there that Dr. Mejia put up. So it goes away after a few seconds. All right. Any other questions in the audience? Are we going to turn it back to the screen before Dr. New and I ask our final questions? Any other questions, Dr. McDonald?
Yes, we have a question from Yale Taylor, who wants to know, how did the students handle the Brown v. Board decision?
How did students in Topeka?
Yes.
From
Well,
your perspective.
You know, my own children weren't old enough to know much about it, but as they grew older, the Brown v. Board came the year after Doug, who is now 70 years old, almost. And so he didn't learn about it at the time it was happening. Actually, you look up on the Topeka newspaper, and there wasn't that much. It wasn't front page headlines. It was mentioned and there were articles about it, but it wasn't one of those things where you had something new about it every single day, day after day. So it made an impact on you. But we were very much aware of it. As far as teaching my own children, well, as they grew older, absolutely, they were very interested in it. As I said, my husband was very interested in it because he was interested in the way the words came down from the Supreme Court of the United States. He was a Thurgood Marshall fan. He felt that Thurgood Marshall had done a great deal for his people and for everybody in the country, and seeing to it that that decision was finally brought before the Supreme Court and finalized, so that it was in the law and would go forward from there. But as far as my own children were concerned, all three of them wound up as debaters. And they learned, one thing they learned, the first thing they learned was that there are two sides to every question. And as a debater, not only did you have to learn about both sides, but you had to debate both sides. You had to be able to debate both the pro and the con of every question. And so it made them better listeners to what was going on at that time. At that time, my son could speak more about it than I could, but there were race riots going on. And as Brown v. Board was put into action, there was resistance here and there, and they heard about what different states were doing about it and so on, as far as the legal part of it is concerned. And of course, as far as I'm concerned, somebody asked about a legacy. What I would want to teach children would be to be an advocate for what you believe in. If you believe strongly about something, but you're too timid to carry a sign someplace, join an organization that thinks the same way you do and is advocating for the same things you do. And then you have somebody near you that believes as you do, and in numbers there's strength, and you become more able to speak for yourself and even be able to speak as an advocate. But just being there, contributing, maybe the day comes when you can contribute monetarily. But in the meantime, your presence is important. And so that's part, and the first thing you'll find out if you belong to an organization like that is you better vote. Don't you dare let that vote go to waste. So those are things that mean a lot to me.
Wow. We are down to our last 10 minutes. Did that hour go fast for you?
Yes.
It flew by. There's so much we still have yet to ask. I'm going to turn this one over to Dr. New. She started off preparing to share, I think, a little bit about your background, and I told her to hold it just in case you mentioned it. I'm going to go back to Dr. New. She's going to ask this question, and then I'll close with the final question. Dr. New?
Well, Mrs. Reeves, thank you for all that you shared. And you did answer, or you did talk about what I was going to share about with your husband coming back from the war. But you've talked a lot tonight about advocacy and organizations that you've been part of. Can you share with us what you feel is your most important contribution to Topeka society or the Topeka community through your advocacy work?
I couldn't say one thing. It's an accumulation, and some of it is just happenstance. I don't know whether I said this before, but we arrived on a Monday in Topeka, and on that Saturday we went to our first symphony concert, and it was the first concert of the third season of the Topeka Symphony, which is now an organization that's over 70 years old. But I became interested. I thought I was coming to a town where I would not get to hear live symphonic music. And I was so thrilled to hear and discover that I was going to get to see orchestra concerts. I became interested in the symphony, and ever after was worked with that. You know, you could say mobile meals was a life-changing thing. I wound up getting the National Guard to carry us around if there was cold and snowy weather that we couldn't drive to the houses and deliver meals to. Now they call it Meals on Wheels, but our original organization was Mobile Meals. We had one of the organizations I was involved in. I found myself, or I guess deliberately chose organizations that tried to do innovative things. And they discovered at that time that children at the age of 18 who were provided for through the state help suddenly were dumped on their own. They were in high school. They had maybe had another full year of high school to finish, and they had no place to live, no place to provide them with food, no place to provide them with anything. So they set up a high school, a home right across the street from Topeka High, where children like that could go and see to it that they got to finish high school. Now there are other things that help children finish high school who have babies, and they're volunteer. At first, it was all volunteer work to provide for those babies so the girls could go back to high school. The volunteer kind of things I was in did that sort of thing to help education in whatever way they could. Now more and more the state helps, or the city helps, or the school district helps. But there were years and years when nobody helped for that sort of thing, and volunteers filled in, and that's the sort of thing I did.
Beautiful.
Wow.
Thank you.
Well, Mother Reeves, and I hope it is okay as I call you Mother, because you have not only a mothering spirit, but you have a service above self spirit. Your involvement in Head Start, your involvement in Meals on Wheels we learned tonight, your involvement in symphony and the music has been amazing. Your 100 years has shaped not only a lot of Topeka, but a lot of the experiences we all are benefiting from today. So thank you for your incredible life of service. I believe your son has a little history lesson to close us out on Brown v. Board. And when he does that, we have a token of appreciation for you to give you to close us on out. We're going to turn it over to Dr. Reeves, and then the final moment, I'll take it from there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anderson. Just a 1-minute history lesson, because I know the people in this room know Brown v. Board better than probably anybody on the planet, but here might be a couple of things that you haven't heard yet. As you heard, I've got the transcripts of the oral arguments, and here's what the losing side said. If the appellant, that's Mr. Oliver Brown and his daughter Linda Brown, if the appellant's construction of the 14th Amendment should prevail here, then there is no doubt in my mind that it would also include the Indian within its grasp just as much as the Negro. That's the way they talked then. This was a guy from South Carolina. If it should prevail here, I'm unable to see why states would have any further right to segregate its pupils on the grounds of sex or mental capacity. Now, who knew that the Brown decision was also about Native Nation kids, was also about women and girls, was also about disabled kids? And he finished this by saying, you have 300 years of history here, and a Supreme Court can't overturn that. Here's what Justice Felix Frankfurter said in response. When the lawyer said you can't change attitudes of 300 years, he said, attitudes in this world are not changed abstractly, as it were, by reading something. Attitudes are partly the result of working. Attitudes are the result of action. You can't just fold your hands and wait for attitudes to change by itself. The woman you've heard tonight is a woman of action, not just reading, not just attitudes, but of action. That's among the many reasons, Mom, we so appreciate you.
Well said. And that is certainly an outstanding closing as we prepare to round up. With that, the token of appreciation Dr. New has for you, and I'll just stand as Dr. New prepares to present it because I'll need to read it. Let's see, how best can we do this? She's on this side, so I'm going to join her.
Oh, my goodness.
And it says, and on the screen, can they see it, Dr. New, on the screen? All right, for Equity Council members, that's the plaque from the Equity Council presented to Mother Reeves. And it reads, and I'll have to read it from this end. Miss Julie Reeves, in recognition for your 100 years of dedication and service to public schools and social justice, on March 30th, 2023, with great appreciation from Topeka Public Schools. Thank you so much for your many years of service. I would shake your hand, but I told everybody not to touch or breathe on you because your age, we want to keep you in this little bubble here. But we love you. We thank you for just all that you do. And I just love that your son said to me, what a fan you are of Topeka Public Schools and how you have been following the work, my work, their work, and how you are loving what you were seeing. And that's how I knew that you were 100 years old, because your son reached out and shared so much about how excited you are about these past years you've been seeing. So it is our true delight and honor to award you this evening with this token of appreciation for your many years of service.
Thank you so much. Thank you so very, very
You gotta
much.
use the hand sanitizer.
I washed,
I know.
I
yeah.
already did it.
No, this is for you.
We don't play with this.
We
This-
want to make sure.
We're
you-
serious about this. You better, you know it. But this,
So-
but I don't want to get this smeared because it's so beautiful. Oh, and it means so much. You can't believe how much it means to me for all the days that I have sat in class and admired the teacher that could handle not all of my children were the stars. Some of them, how Mrs. Gunzelman managed Steve is beyond me. He came home one day and said, Mrs. Gunzelman bopped me on the head and said, what does it take to light your fire? She was so angry with him because she saw so much potential and he was goofing around.
Is this the one that went to the military?
Yes. Yeah, he became a two-star.
Yeah, two-star general.
All right, she did something right. Oh, thank you, thank you. I can't tell you how honored I am to receive this, and it will have a very special place in my home, believe me. I will
We are
be able to
so-
look at it and remember many, many happy years in the Topeka school system. Believe me, my children had some wonderful, wonderful teachers. And I admired them because they were testing my mettle all the time with 3 boys.
Well, with that, we thank everybody that is on the screen, and at the very end, we'll be sure to get a good photo for you there. We thank everyone on the screen for joining us. It is exactly 6:30. We always start at right at 5:30, and it is 6:32. Again, on the screen, if you can just put a little heart in the corner of your screen, letting her know that you are sending love her way. We look forward to sending you a card from the Equity Council on November the 8th on your birthday. We'll be sure to come to Brewster Place and deliver that. You and Dr. New. Absolutely.
Glad to get together.
So with that, and again, we thank everyone in the audience who drove up today to spend this evening hour with us. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, Equity Council members. Thank you.